One area of sales and business in general that is most overlooked is profit margins. These are poorly understood and are often assumed to be really hard to improve other than the old lower your overhead method. Well, there are actually at least 67 different ways to increase your margins, and reducing expenses is only one of them. So here are my top 3 tips for improving your margins, which means improving your bottom line, your profits. Tip number 1 is know your margins. Understand the difference between margin and markup in retail or service. When you are figuring out how much you're spending and how much you're going to charge, know the difference. So doubling the price of something you paid $5 for, you're going to sell for 10. Your markup is 100%, but your margin on that is only 50% because margin is the percentage of the sale price that is profit. So 100% markup means a 50% profit. So make sure you don't confuse markup and margin. That's a big mistake I see all the time. So you got to know your margins. You got to measure them. You got to pay attention and look for opportunities in purchasing to get things at a lower price. Talk to your suppliers. What are some ways you can get better price, better terms on your market so that you can have better margins when you sell? Make sure if you are like a service provider that your job costing, that you know what your costs are and that you maintain your margins and that you set your prices so that you hit a certain margin target. Always have a margin target for what you're doing. So the more we know our margins and understand the difference between markup and margin and don't confuse the two, the better we can increase them and generate more profit. So tip number 2 is to sell more high margin items than low margin items. So this requires, again, knowing your margins, like in tip 1. Once you do that, then you can focus your efforts, your salespeople's efforts on selling more high margin things. Make sure if you've got commission salespeople that their commission is at least partially based on profit and not just sales. Otherwise, they might just sell tons and tons of product or services that you don't really make any money on. So make sure that at least part of their compensation is profit based, not just sales based, because you can really only afford to pay them out of the profit for the sale. And again, this requires knowing your margins on your products. Understand what your highest margin products and services are and what your lowest margin products and services are, and do some education, train your team. Teach them how to sell the higher margin items. We want to sell more of those and fewer of the low margin items. So tip number 3 is go ahead, now that we know our margins and we know which are high and which are low, sometimes we can bundle them together. If there's a really popular item that's fairly low margin, go ahead and bundle a high margin item with it so that they get a little bit of a discount, but you're moving more high margin items because we want to turn our inventory of higher level margin items and services. And we can do that by bundling. You can help move a high margin item by bundling popular low margins with them. So you can do it either way. Add the high margin to the low margin or add the low margin to the high margin. Depends on what your clients, your customers are looking for and how you position the bundling. And this raises your overall average seller sale and it raises your average margin on your sales. And so all this boils back to really knowing your margins. And once you know them, knowing what the things are that you can do. Bundling, teaching your team which items have the highest margins. And if you're a retail operation, your merchandising should put the focus on your highest margin things, not your lowest margin things. You can put the low margin things up by the counter, but when they walk in the door, we want your customers to see all the high margin items and really focus on those and make sure that your sales efforts and your marketing efforts are teaching people the value of your high margin products and services rather than the low ones. So if you're ready to figure out how to increase your margins, whether it's your gross margins, your net margins, or you don't even know the difference, go ahead and click on the link in the description and go ahead and schedule a 20-minute call with me, Coach Mark, and we'll take a look at what you're selling and brainstorm some ideas to improve your margins. And I'll throw out bonus tip number 4, increasing your prices always improves your margins. So if you're ready to increase your margins, go ahead and click that link and we will set up a time and chat.